Social media has a way of making us feel more important than we are until it makes us feel much less important. An example from this week, if you're on Instagram, you may be familiar with the little reminders that pop up and say, so-and-so who you might know is on Instagram. Then you click the follow button to keep track of their pictures and their video posts. This week, I got one of those reminders. Beyonce, who you might know, is on Instagram. I did a double take. Typically, I don't get these kinds of reminders from celebrities. Is there someone else named Beyonce who I do know? Is it possible my brain thought for a microsecond that someone I know actually does know Beyonce? That Beyonce? And that's why Instagram told me that I should follow her. I clicked the reminder, which sent me to Beyonce's page. It was that Beyonce. Her page showed me 215 million other people who do follow her and also, I suspect, don't know her. My heart sank a millimeter. I didn't follow Beyonce. But today I want to speak on a serious topic with you, an important topic. This month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I don't personally know the effects of domestic violence any more than I know Beyonce Knowles, but in my role as spiritual leader of this congregation and in my previous position in Chicago, I have known far too many people who are survivors of sexual, other physical or psychological abuse, and their stories frequently involve, to be completely serious because this is no joke, the insidious roller coaster of being made to feel a little more important and then being made to feel inconsequential and powerless. And this is just one of numerous techniques that abusers use to control their victims. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website, abuse is cyclical. There are periods of time where things may be calmer, but those times are followed by a buildup of tension and abuse, which usually results in the abuser peaking with intensified abuse. Thank God I don't have a personal story of domestic or sexual violence to tell, but guess who does? Our biblical characters know this story all too well. In the course of our Parsha alone, the following events take place. The men of Sodom, the Anshe Ha'ir, demand that Lot expel guests from his home so that they may rape them. Lot, meanwhile, offers up his 2 daughters to the horde instead of the 2 male strangers, whom we know to be angels, but Lot does not. The gang of rapists then attack Lot himself instead of his guests. Thankfully, the angels intervene, and Lot and his family, minus his wife, are spared long enough to flee the city. This is horrifyingly not the conclusion of a parallel story from the book of Judges, the infamous tale of the Pelegesh Begiv'ah, in which a man sacrifices his concubine to a similar mob. To be clear, while apologia informs many of the traditional commentators on this passage, it's hardly universal. For example, Nachmanides explains that Lot's actions here destroy all pretense and demonstrate that he has a roa lev, that is a wicked heart. The very next thing that happens in our Parsha, though, is that Lot's 2 daughters, the ones he had intended to hand over to this violent fate, drug and date rape their father and become pregnant by him without his consent. Then Abraham, for the second time, no less, in Torah, passes his wife off to a foreign king to protect his own hide, only to be rescued from his indiscretion by God, who punishes again for the second time, no less, the king instead of Abraham. But wait, there's more. As soon as Sarah finally conceives, gives birth, and weans her son Isaac, she demands that Ishmael and Hagar be driven out of the camp. God alone rescues them from exposure and starvation. After all these violent and abusive occurrences, we get a short break for some well digging, as I talked about earlier. And then the last chapter of the Sedra depicts the Akedat Yitzchak, the near slaughter of Isaac by his father Abraham. I don't think that the organizers of Domestic Violence Awareness Month were thinking of the Torah cycle when they chose October, and unfortunately there are plenty of other examples in Tanakh of similar events that shed light on abuse or commodification of human beings by those who are known to or loved by them. But the point here isn't to denigrate Torah or to demean its characters, our ancestors. Actually, my point is exactly the opposite. The genius of Torah is that it doesn't shy away from the shadow side of the human condition. Our sacred texts are illustrative of holy living and present laudable characters, but they also demand that we give attention to human frailty and failure. Torah contains traumatic incidents, and a trauma-informed interpretation of Scripture is a useful, honest, and important approach, I think, to reading it. Consider, for example, this short poem by Sherry Blumberg entitled Sarai. Of course, Sarah's name before it's changed. Leave my home, my father, my mother, go with him to the place unknown. Follow this man who will cause me tears, who may bring me laughter, who says it's God's plan. So God, speak to me that I may hear, not just to him. This is my plea. Now, the poet isn't claiming it was unusual for women of Sarah's generation to follow their men. Yes, women were more subjugated to their husbands back then, had less control than they do in the 21st century here in Maryland. But by providing an eisegetical interpretation where our modern conceptions are read deliberately back into the ancient text, Blumberg activates the potential energy of Holy Writ to speak to the deepest concerns of every generation. Domestic Violence Awareness Month exists to raise awareness and to support survivors. This poem and others like it give us powerful models of what we would understand as abusive behavior in our day. To my point, 3 of the 10 warning signs listed on Baltimore's Chana website are warning signs that, as of abuse, are demonstrated in some fashion in the Abraham and Sarah relational dynamic. Abusers will, here's the 3 that I noticed. 1, control your finances by emptying your bank account, using money as a bargaining tool, not allowing you to have a credit card or making you ask for an allowance. Obviously, these are modern constructions, but the same idea of the husband fully controlling the wife's financial position certainly exists in the text. 2, pressure or force you into unwanted sex or make all decisions about your birth control. 3, control you by using text from religious books for emotional, sexual abuse or gain, and use other religious events to control you. When we pretend that abuse doesn't happen in Jewish communities, in more affluent communities, in white communities, to women and girls, but not to boys and men, we compound the problem by forcing more victims into hiding. When we destigmatize, we open up possibilities for conversation, for awareness, and support of survivors seeking escape from their abusers and abusive situations. So acknowledging the ways in which the Torah's text, in its historical context, serves as a counterexample to our own, the ways its characters demonstrate behavior we would never tolerate for our own children, paradoxically gives Torah and Jewish tradition more power, more relevance to our lives. That's why I appreciate Esther Fuchs, Near Eastern Studies professor at Arizona, when she says, like the preceding parasha, this one frames the theme of generational and genealogical continuity as a male affair. Women are constructed largely as sexual objects and procreative instruments, with mostly a physical and corporeal relationship to the story of threatened birth and threatened survival. In other words, power and control is in the hands of men. Addressing societies that tolerate and foster domestic violence means naming this in our day and then beginning to seek solutions together. It also means, my friends, that synagogues need to be places where we can talk about this. Not just your rabbi to you in a sermon, and not just you to your rabbi in private, though I'm deeply humbled by those of you who have taken me into your confidence over the years. I would like Beth Am'er to take a more proactive approach so that everyone who davens here, celebrates here, volunteers here, loves and learns here, also knows that we are a congregation dedicated to ensuring that every member of our community is treated with dignity and respect. One person who joins me in this goal is my friend and fellow Beth Am'er, Dr. Elizabeth Winter, and I'm honored at this time to call Beth to the bima to share a few words.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Hello.
We're friends on Instagram, and just to make you feel better, I also don't know Beyonce. Thank you, Rabbi Burg, for the invitation to join you on the bima today. My name is Elizabeth Winter. Before we go further, I do want to warn you that the themes that I'm going to be discussing are upsetting. Can you hear me now? You still can't hear me? Better? Okay. So I'll start over. My name's Elizabeth Winter. I'm going to be talking about some upsetting things this morning. And so for those of you for whom this might be triggering or upsetting, please do what you need to do to be most comfortable in yourself. For those of you who don't know me, I've been a member here at Beth Am'er for over 10 years. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm Ariel's wife, Sophie's mom. It's probably how most people know me. And I am also fortunate enough to have survived an abusive childhood home. My mother, however, did not survive her marriage to my father. He murdered her when I was just 9 years old. My childhood situation is not an uncommon one. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have experienced some form of intimate partner violence in their lives, and 1 in 5 homicide victims were killed by an intimate partner. At least 1 in 7 children have experienced child abuse or neglect in the past year, and approximately 1 in 10 adults over the age of 60 have experienced elder abuse or exploitation in the past year. It may be tempting to say, not my community, not Jews. The Jewish home, Shalom Bayit, in which domestic harmony reigns and all participants are nurtured, is a beautiful ideal, but studies have repeatedly shown that the prevalence of domestic violence in the Jewish community, all branches of Judaism, is equal to that of the general US population. Violence and abuse in the home do not discriminate, but the cultural context in which they occur may change the way they manifest or are perceived. Cultural context may also impact the strength of a support network or a survivor's decision to leave the abusive situation. Survivors are often reluctant to discuss their abuse. Many, like myself, continue to feel fear and shame even once they attain a safe environment, and some may even experience concern for their abuser. Education and advocacy are necessary to move beyond our own preconceptions and stereotypes and best support abuse survivors and encourage them to thrive. This month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It was launched in 1987 to raise awareness of domestic violence and also uplift and celebrate survivors. It is an appropriate context for Rabbi Burg and I to reveal that we're beginning discussions about trauma, violence, and abuse in our community and those communities with which we intersect. Our goal is to work on resource gathering and program development. Already, he and I are partnering on gathering resources, including hotlines, lists of shelters, social services, counseling opportunities, and places where people can receive legal aid. We are in the earliest stages, but we'll work with careful intention to write a blueprint for Beth Am'er to recognize and respond to incidents of abuse and violence. The Talmud tells us, anyone who has the ability to correct a situation and is derelict in doing so bears the responsibility for whatever results therefrom. Abuse acknowledged but unaddressed is abuse tolerated and condoned. Changing a culture requires all of us. As a passionate congregation devoted to social justice, we have the opportunity to generate change in our community by gaining knowledge, creating a safe space, responding with care and compassion, and spreading awareness. I spent many years ashamed of my past, of the abuse that I suffered at my father's hands, and my mother's violent and untimely death. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I would even lie. I would say that my parents had died in an accident to avoid discussion. I may be a psychiatrist, but despite my training, it's only with years of my own therapy, the support of my husband, Ariel, and the experience of becoming a parent myself that I have really embraced my history and accepted that while I am a survivor of abuse, it does not define me. And it does not impact people's perceptions of me in the way that I feared. I categorically reject the idea that everything happens for a reason. I find it callous to suggest that there is a purpose in the abuse of others. But I do believe that we can find reason and that we can create meaning from events that have occurred. In recent years, I have stopped hiding, and I embraced my opportunity in helping to reduce stigma for survivors of trauma, for helping people to come out from underneath the pall that abuse spreads over their lives. Rabbi Burg and I will keep you apprised as we develop Beth Am'er's response to abuse and violence in our community. If you have personal or professional experience in these areas, please don't hesitate to connect with me and with Rabbi Burg to share your thoughts, your concerns, and your suggestions. Our ears and our hearts are open to you. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.